The phone on my kitchen wall rang at 7:14 on a Tuesday evening, and a boy's voice, cracking and wet, said, "Grandma? Grandma, it's me. I'm in jail. Please, please don't tell Mom." And across my kitchen table, buttering his second piece of toast, sat my real grandson. He looked up at me. I lifted one finger to my lips, and I held that phone a little tighter, and I made myself breathe slow. The way you learn to breathe in a courtroom when the verdict is about to be read and your face cannot move. Because here is what that scared little voice did not know. I spent 31 years in the county clerk's office, 3 doors down from the courtrooms, and I filed more arrest records and more bail papers than that boy could count if he counted all night. And not once, in 31 years, did bail ever arrive in a plain envelope handed to a stranger at someone's front door. So I did the only sensible thing a woman my age can do when a liar calls her by the name that only love is allowed to use. I pulled my green steno pad across the table, the same kind I'd written in every working day of my life. I clicked my pen, and I played along. I'm going to tell you how a phone call built to empty my savings account ended instead, with 2 young men in handcuffs on my front lawn. A third arrested 4 days later, and a route these people had run through my town for the better part of a year, finally going dark. I'm going to tell you how my grandson, who'd barely said 10 words to me in a year, ended up holding my hand under that table the whole way through, and finally telling me why he'd stayed away. And I'm going to tell you about the one moment, near the end, when my own steady hands gave me away, and I thought I'd lost the whole thing. But it starts with that voice, and the first thing you need to understand about that voice is that it did not know who I was. "Grandma," the boy sobbed. "You know who this is, right?" Now, anyone who's worked around these things knows that question, and knows it isn't really a question. It's a door they hold open, hoping you'll walk through it and hand them a name they can wear. They don't know who they've called. They have a list, and a script, and a room full of telephones, and they are fishing. And right there, with my real grandson sitting 3 feet away, mouthing the words, "Who is it?" I made a decision that surprised even me. I let my voice go thin and frightened, an old woman's voice. And I said, "Tommy? Tommy, honey, is that you?" And the voice on the line breathed out, relieved, and said, Yeah, Grandma. It's Tommy. I'm so sorry. I do not have a grandson named Tommy. I have never had a grandson named Tommy. I reached up into the air and invented him, a whole boy out of nothing. And a stranger snatched him up and put him on like a coat and apologized to me in his name. And something in me that had been uncertain went still, and cold, and clear. Now I didn't suspect. Now I knew. And there's a particular calm that arrives on the far side of certainty, and you can do a great deal of careful work from inside it. I turned my steno pad around and slid it across the table to Danny. I'd written 4 words, "Not real. Play along." His eyes went wide as saucers, and to his everlasting credit, and I'll love him for this, until the day I die, that boy did not make one single sound. The story came fast, the way they always come, because speed is the entire weapon. They can't let you stop and think, because thinking is the one thing that saves you. There'd been a car accident. Tommy had been driving. It was bad. Someone was hurt. He'd been arrested, and oh, Grandma, please, please don't tell Mom. She'll be so ashamed of me. Promise me you won't tell Mom, and I want you to notice that. Because I noticed it, even then, even with my heart going. Before they asked me for one single dollar, they asked me to be alone. That's always the very first thing these people steal. Not your money, your witnesses. But to understand why I did what I did next, why I didn't just hang up like a sensible woman, you have to know who was on the other end of my own kitchen, and you have to know about the quiet. I'm 73. My husband Walter passed 2 springs ago, quiet, in his chair, with the ball game on, and I've learned since that grief is mostly a great deal of silence, with a man's name folded up inside it. For 31 years, my job had been to write things down, arrest records, bail receipts, case numbers kept right, Because right was the whole job. You sit at that counter long enough, and you learn the shape of things, what a real docket number looks like, what a real lawyer sounds like, how bail actually moves through a building. And you learn the sadder thing, what it looks like when somebody's being robbed and doesn't know it yet. I'd watched it happen my first year. To a woman taken in by a voice on a telephone that invented a son in trouble, she gave strangers most of a year's savings before we untangled it, and I never forgot that I couldn't give $1 of it back. You carry a thing like that. I'd carried it 50 years, and didn't know until that Tuesday that I'd been carrying it toward something. And then there was Danny, my daughter's boy, sitting at my table for the first time in months. For most of his life he came for dinner on Tuesdays, and somewhere in the last year the Tuesdays got thin, and then they stopped. That night he'd just shown up, no warning, thinner than I remembered, in a jacket I didn't know, with something heavy sitting on him that he hadn't found the words for yet. I had a pork roast that could stretch. Of course he could come in. I've lived long enough to know that room at the table is the rarest wealth there is. So that's the kitchen the phone rang into. An old woman who knew exactly how the law works, and a grandson with a secret, and a stranger who thought he'd found a frightened woman sitting all alone. He thought he had. And then the crying went muffled, a hand placed over a receiver somewhere far away, and a new voice came onto the line, the one that does the real work. It was smooth. It was calm. A grown man's voice with a courtroom folded into it, the kind that has said these exact sentences 100 times before breakfast. "Ma'am," it said, "my name is Mr. Bradford. I'm the attorney the court has assigned to your grandson this evening. I'm going to help you help him. But we have to move quickly." And he told me the bail a number large enough to frighten and small enough to reach. They are always so careful about that. He told me it had to be cash, and he told me, kindly, so very kindly, that there was no need for a woman my age to drive downtown so late, because a court courier was already in the area and could come to the house within the hour to collect it. And then he said the sentence I'd been waiting for. The tell above all tells. Now, ma'am, I do have to advise you of something. There's a court gag order on this matter. You're not permitted to discuss it with your daughter, or with anyone at all, until after the arraignment tomorrow. I'm sorry to say that violating it could be treated as tampering, and it could hurt the boy's case very badly. I wrote 3 words on my pad and underlined them twice. The fake order. Because in 31 years, inside a courthouse, I had never once seen a gag order that forbids a grandmother from telephoning her own daughter. There is no such thing. That isn't a court order, it's a fence. One they build around you in the dark while your heart is pounding, so nobody who loves you can lean over it and say the single sentence that would end this, "Sweetheart, hang up the phone." I should have been terrified. Instead, I was taking dictation. "Of course," I said, trembling beautifully. "Whatever's best for Tommy." And Mr. Bradford, pleased with me now, rattled off a docket number for my records. Fast, the way they do, a long string of digits meant to sound official, and slide right past you in the panic. But I do not let case numbers slide past me. I've written 10,000 of them. I wrote his down, every digit, and the moment it was on the page, I knew, a second time, all the way to the floor. Because our county's case numbers begin with the year, then a single letter for the division. Criminal is one letter, civil is another. I know those letters the way you know your children's birthdays, and the letter Mr. Bradford had just given me does not exist on our docket. It is not a division. It is not anything. He'd handed me a number that could not exist in the building where I'd worked 31 years, and handed it to me as proof. I looked at that impossible number in my own steady handwriting, and I thought, I've got you. You clever, cruel, faraway man. You've just laid your whole hand face up on my kitchen table, and you don't even know you've done it. It was right about then that they made the one move I could not file away coldly. The boy came back on the line, just for a moment, the way they do to keep the hook set, and through his crying he said it. I love you, Grandma, I'm so scared. I have said those 3 words, and meant them, for 50 years. I said them to Walter across a kitchen this very size for 41 of them. And now I had to sit at my own table and listen to a stranger counterfeit them, in a child's borrowed voice, for money. I didn't write anything down. For just that one moment, I couldn't. I reached across the table instead, and took my real grandson's warm, living hand into mine, and held onto it while the fake one wept in my ear. Danny didn't understand yet what he was holding me through. He just held on back. That is the cruelty of the thing. That's the part I want you to carry out of this story, even if you forget everything else. These people don't, in the end, steal your money. They rent your love by the minute, and then they hand you the bill. And it was there, in that holding, that I finally understood the whole shape of it. This call had never been meant for me, not me, particularly. It had been built for a woman alone in an empty house, a quiet kitchen, a frightened heart, and nobody across the table to catch her eye and shake their head. And I realized, with a cold drop in my stomach, that I'd very nearly been her. Because for 2 weeks before that Tuesday, my telephone had been ringing at odd hours and saying nothing. A pause, somebody breathing, a click. Once a man's voice asked if this was the residence of, and then said my whole name, the way it reads on a deed, and hung up when I answered. I'd told myself it was robocalls. It wasn't. Those had been soundings. Someone checking the water. Is anyone home? Is it a woman? Does she live alone? Building a little file on the house at the end of my street before they ever spent a real call on me. I hadn't been dialed at random. I'd been chosen. And if I'd been chosen, then so had others. Quiet others, all over town, each one sitting alone, with the same secret. Because shame is the second fence these people build. The one that keeps victims from ever comparing notes. This wasn't one cruel phone call. This was a route. Somebody was running my townhouse by Lonely House, and they believed they'd never be caught, because the whole machine is built on one bet, made over and over, that there will be no one at the table. Well, I looked at Danny. Tonight, in this kitchen, they'd bet wrong. And I decided I was not going to merely survive this call, I was going to use it. I'd keep these people talking and walk them, smiling, into the one house on their whole route where the grandmother was not alone, had spent 31 years learning exactly how the law works, and had been waiting 50 years, though she never knew it, for a counter she could finally clear. I only had to do one thing. I had to not hang up, because hanging up does precisely nothing except send these people one name farther down their list, on to the next quiet kitchen. I didn't want them one name down. I wanted them off the list entirely. More than that, God help me, I wanted the list. So I went to work. Mr. Bradford, I said, letting my voice shake harder now, because a frightened old woman is a beautiful thing to a man like that. I have some cash in the house, but I'll have to find it. Could you give me a few minutes? I don't want to do a single thing wrong for Tommy. He couldn't have been more gracious. Take all the time you need, ma'am. A snake is very patient when it believes it's already won. I put my hand over the receiver, and in a whisper I gave my grandson the most important instructions of that whole night on the steno pad, already written out, because I'd learned long ago to write the order down before you give it, so nothing gets lost in a frightened moment. Call the sheriff. Non-emergency line. Say, Grandparent scam in progress. Cash courier coming to this house. Give them this address. Stay calm. Don't hang up on them or on ME. Danny read it twice. And then he did the thing I'll be proud of for the rest of my life. He didn't argue. He didn't freeze. He took his cell phone quietly down the hall, and I heard his low, steady voice doing exactly what I'd asked, while in my other ear a stranger waited to rob me blind. And here is where it nearly came apart. I came back to the line, and Mr. Bradford had changed. The warmth had cooled. He'd heard something a murmur down the hall. The angle of my breathing, I'll never know what, but the snake had lifted its head. "Ma'am," he said. And there was an edge under the silk now. "Is there someone else in the home with you? Because I have to tell you, if there is, that is a violation of the order, and I will have to advise the court that you've compromised your grandson's case." My heart went sideways. Down the hall, Danny was still on with the sheriff. If I said the wrong thing, Bradford would hang up, and a hang-up meant no courier, no thread, no route, nothing but a frightened old woman, and a deadline, and these people moving on to the next house by morning. Everything balanced on the next sentence out of my mouth. So I did the only thing 31 years had taught me. I gave him the truth, bent just enough to fit. "That's the television, dear," I said, and I let my voice break, not acting now, because my hands had started to shake for real, and I used it. I had it on for company. I'm an old woman alone in her kitchen and her grandbaby's in jail, and I can't even call my own daughter should I turn it off. "I'll turn it off, I don't want to do anything wrong. Please don't let them hurt Tommy." And I let an old woman's frightened tears do the rest. Because the thing about the truth, I was frightened. I was alone in the ways that mattered. My grandbaby was, in a sense. In that very room is that the truth is always the most convincing lie you can tell. There was a pause, a long one, the kind where you can hear a man deciding whether you're prey or a problem. And then the silk came back. "Of course, ma'am. Leave it on if it comforts you. Now the courier is just minutes away." I'd held the line, but I'll tell you, my hands didn't stop shaking for an hour. A cruiser eased onto my street with its lights off and parked 3 houses down. A second came around the back. I kept Mr. Bradford talking. I put him on hold twice, once to find my reading glasses, once to count it out where the light was better, and each little lie bought another minute, while I folded ordinary paper into a plain, white envelope. There was no money in that envelope. There was never going to be any money in that envelope. And it happened, and I've thanked God for it more than once, that the sergeant who caught Danny's call was a man named Reyes, who'd worked the courthouse in my years there and remembered the old clerk with the green steno pads. He didn't need convincing. He'd seen this precise cruelty too many times, and he knew, the way I knew, that the courier is the loose thread, the one human being these faraway men must expose to daylight, and that if you're quiet and quick, you can pull it. The knock came at 8:40. I told Mr. Bradford the courier had arrived, and he said, warm as fresh bread, "Wonderful, just hand him the envelope, ma'am, and we'll have Tommy home before you know it." And I thought, you will never say that invented boy's name in my house again. I opened the door to a young man, 20, maybe 22, ball cap low, hood up, and he wouldn't bring his eyes up off my welcome mat. He had a cheap receipt book in one hand, and when he spoke there wasn't one drop of Mr. Bradford's smooth in him. He was nervous, and young, and somewhere underneath it I thought. "Ashamed. Sorry to bother you, ma'am," he said. "I'm here to pick up the documents." Documents, not money. They train them to say documents, so the word leaving the courier's own mouth is never the true word. "Of course, dear," I said, and I handed him the envelope, and he wrote a name in his little book that I'm quite certain wasn't his, and tore off the carbon and held it out to me. "Polite as you please, this boy come to rob me, telling me thank you," and he turned to go. And the porch light caught the 2 deputies already coming up my front walk, one from either side, unhurried, the way careful men move when the thing is already finished and they know it. The boy did not run. He had nowhere to run, and I believe he understood that the moment his knuckles touched my door, he simply stopped. His shoulders came down, and he closed his eyes, the way you do when a thing you've been dreading a long, long time has finally, mercifully arrived. He set my envelope on the porch rail as gently as if it might break, and put his own 2 hands behind his back before a single deputy had asked him to. That is not the gesture of a mastermind. That is the gesture of a boy who has been waiting to be caught. And I'll tell you honestly, I thought that was the end of it. But the night wasn't finished. Because as the deputies were reading that boy his rights on my front lawn, the telephone on my kitchen wall rang again. I looked at Reyes. He looked at me. And my old courthouse bones knew what this was. They are never done after one payment. The first number is only the door once you've paid. You've proven you'll pay. And a second voice calls to say it wasn't enough. I picked up. A new voice, older and harder. No courtroom polish, a man who believed I was already broken. An accident investigator, he said. The other driver had taken a turn for the worse. The bail was revoked. The costs had climbed, and Tommy was looking at real prison time, unless I sent more. Tonight, and then, because cruelty is the only tool these men own, he warned me that a call had been detected leaving my house to law enforcement, and that I could be charged for it, unless I cooperated quietly. Right now. He meant it to terrify me. Instead, it told me their first courier had gone dark, and they didn't yet understand why they were off their script. And a man off his script will tell you things a man on his script never would. So Reyes gave me a nod, and we did it again, cleverer this time, because now I wasn't stalling, I was fishing. I wept. I begged. I asked where to bring it. The same young man, or a different one. Were these boys even local? And the frightened man, off his script, let slip more than he should have. Another runner was already nearby, staging with the others out of a lot on the north end of town, and he was complaining that the kid should have checked in by now. That was the thread. The whole route, handed to me by a man certain he was the one doing the taking. A second runner came 20 minutes later, met by the same deputies at the same porch. And 4 days later, not that night, because real life is not a movie, and warrants take what they take, agents arrested a local man in that North End lot. The one who rented the cars, laid out the routes, and sent those frightened boys to those doors, while never once walking up a front walk himself. The fixer, the one human hinge between the faraway room and my town. I'd love to tell you they all went to prison that week, in a tidy row, and the credits rolled. That's not how it went, and I won't lie to you about it, because the lie is their tool, and I won't borrow it. The first boy, the one who put his hands behind his back before he was asked, cooperated. He'd answered an ad online, package retrieval, cash daily, no experience. The way you answer any gig when you're broke and 20 and not asking the right questions. He'd begun to understand what it was around the 3rd or 4th pickup, and by then he was too frightened and too far in to climb out. None of that makes him innocent, and the law didn't treat him as innocent, but he told the truth, all of it, and the truth became the map. The second runner and the local fixer were charged with the serious things: conspiracy, wire fraud, the laundering of frightened people's savings. The fixer, who'd grown comfortable, even proud, running his quiet route through other people's loneliness, learned the comfort had only ever been alone. The room far away, the openers and closers, and the smooth, tireless Mr. Bradford's is slower, and crosses borders, and goes the way these cases go, with patience measured in seasons rather than nights. But it goes. Because a single caught courier is a loose brick, and the people whose whole job is to pull loose bricks had been waiting a long time for one in our county. My envelope, my receipt, that impossible docket number in my careful hand, all of it, went into a file, alongside other kitchens in other towns where other grandmothers had been alone and afraid. And here is the part I hold on to. When the route went dark, the sheriff's office did a thing I didn't expect. They let it be known. Gently, around the senior center and the church bulletin and the pharmacy counter, that a scam had been working our town, and that anyone who'd lost money should come forward. No shame in it. And they came. Not all of them, but enough. People who'd been sitting alone for months with a secret and a hole in their savings learned they hadn't been foolish, they'd been hunted. The same as me, by professionals. I watched a man I'd known for years finally lift his eyes at the coffee urn on a Wednesday and rejoin the conversation. The money was mostly gone for those folks, and I won't pretend otherwise. But the silence broke. And the silence, I've come to believe, was always the bigger theft. Because that's the real robbery, and the real return. They isolate you in order to take from you. So the whole of the medicine is simply to refuse to be isolated. Which brings me back to my own kitchen, to my grandson, and to the thing he'd carried in on his shoulders that whole long night, and finally set down. The deputies left near midnight. Reyes squeezed my hand at the door and called me by my old courthouse title, and I won't pretend it didn't mean something. And then the house was quiet again, but a different quiet. A full one. Because Danny was still in it. We did the dishes. Him washing, me drying, the way Walter and I had done 10,000 nights. And somewhere, in the warm water and the soap, and the ordinary clink of the plates, with his eyes on the dark window instead of on me, my grandson finally found the door he'd come to open. He'd lost his job. Back in the spring. Months ago. And he'd been too ashamed to sit at my table and have me ask, the way grandmothers ask, "So how's work going, honey?" So he'd stopped coming. He'd let the Tuesdays go thin, then let them go entirely. He'd made himself scarce, and then, week by week, he'd made himself alone the way you do when some quiet, broken voice inside you starts telling you the people who love you would only love you less for it, if they saw you needing them. And I stood there with a dish towel in my hands, the whole long night still ringing in my ears, and I thought, my God, it's the same bet. It's the exact same bet. The men in that faraway room, and the lie my grandson had told himself in the dark, were running the same con. That you're better off alone. That you should keep the hard things secret. That love is a thing you have to deserve, and can lose, and must therefore hide from. It's the oldest lie there is, and it's the engine under every one of those calls, and it had very nearly taken my grandson from me, by slow inches, without a courier ever knocking on a door. "Danny," I said, "look at me. They counted on me being alone tonight. That was their whole plan, an empty house, a frightened old woman, and nobody across the table. That's the only thing in the world that makes the trick work." I set down the towel. "So don't you ever do their work for them. Don't you ever go making yourself alone in this family, because you've got it into your head that you're not enough for it. There is always, always room at this table. And I will always pick up the phone." He was quiet a long while, his hands gone still in the gray water. And then, in a smaller voice than I'd heard from him since he was a boy, he said, "Grandma, why'd you tell them his name was Tommy?" And I told him the truth. Because no grandmother should ever have to guess the name of the grandchild on the telephone. And a real one never has to. He laughed. It cracked right out of him, surprised, and then it kept coming. And it was the first time I'd heard that boy laugh in over a year, and it filled the whole kitchen and pushed the silence back into the corners where it belongs. He comes for dinner every Tuesday now. He hasn't missed one. He found new work by the autumn, and he tells me about it whether it's going well or badly, which is the part I treasure the most. I keep my green steno pad by the telephone still, the same as I have for 50 years. For 31 of them it caught other people's worst days, in my careful hand, so the court would have it right. It's a strange thing, and a healing thing, at 73, to have finally filled a page that ends with the right people winning, and the right boy laughing in my kitchen. So let me tell you the one thing I most want you to carry away from all of this, especially if you're old enough that a call like mine might someday come ringing for you. 2. Fear is the only thing those people are actually selling. The accident, the jail, the lawyer, the gag order, the courier at the door, all of it, is only packaging wrapped around fear. And you do not have to buy it. When that phone rings, and a voice you love is in terrible trouble, and you must act right now, and you mustn't tell a soul that is the moment to do the exact opposite of everything they're shouting at you. Hang up. Call your family back on a number you already have. And let their fear sit there alone on the line, where it belongs. Because it was never yours to carry. So let me ask you, before I go, if that telephone had rung in your kitchen tonight, and somewhere deep down, underneath all the fright, you knew, what would you have done? Tell me, down in the comments. And tell me your age while you're at it. I read every one of them, every night. And I am never once alone while I do. Because a week later, the telephone rang again. Only this time it wasn't for me. It was Ruth, who lives 2 doors down, and her voice was all wrong, thin and far away, and she told me a very kind man from her bank's fraud department had called to say her account had been hacked. And that, to keep her money safe, she'd need to move every last dollar of it into a new secure account he'd set up for her, right away, while he stayed on the line to help her do it, and that she had already done it. I reached for my green steno pad. I clicked my pen. What I did about Ruth's empty account, and about the so-called bank examiner, who never once imagined that the little old lady 2 doors down had spent 31 years reading paperwork exactly like the lies he was reading to her well. That is the next story, and I will see you there.